Wait, I need a pause. What does idiom mean?
An idiom is like a saying that means something else. Like to fly off the handle doesn't mean to literally jump off of a handle and
a thing in
fly.
It's like a metaphor that we just accept into regular speech.
Got it.
Like that's fire.
That is fire.
Mm-hmm. Welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast with your hosts, Hannah,
Phil,
Jackson,
and Maddie.
Welcome back, everybody, to Liturgical Shenanigans.
Welcome.
Hey, we have made it through
Lent.
Holy Week.
Lent and Holy Week.
Yeah, barely.
And here we are.
But no one is more alive than Jesus.
That's true.
Twice alive. And ever alive. All the alive.
Christ is risen.
Christ is risen indeed. And here we are in Eastertide. For the focus of this particular episode, we're just going to be reflecting a little bit on the practice that we had throughout Lent of translating through Isaiah 58.
Yes, that was correct, Jackson. Yes.
Isaiah 58. We did one on Isaiah 55 sometime during Lent, and ever since I've been like consistently confused which one we're talking about.
No.
We've been very deep in Isaiah.
We have been in the depths of Isaiah, and we are now having kind of translated through the entirety of chapter 58, which is really fun. We're going to be continuing to release the translations that we've worked on over the next while. Mm-hmm. So keep an eye on the Instagram feed for you could go and check them out now. We have 4 of them up already, and there'll be some more up. Who knows when you're listening to this, there'll be more of them up on the Instagram feed over there. But yeah, we just want to take a second and reflect on both what it was like to just do the physical act of translating, which is a gift for me at least, and
it's for some of us a curse.
A gift and a curse. But then also how Isaiah, the kind of intentional, prolonged reflection on Isaiah throughout Lent, through the act of translating and the act of creating around it, has affected us. So I don't know. I'm just going to kick it out there. What rises to the top first for people as you reflect back over the last month of doing that?
I experienced mostly stress in translating it. But I also was thinking about my experience of this, and it strikes me that it's a privilege to be able to translate the Bible from its original text. And there's so many layers to that privilege. It's a privilege to have been able to afford or be given the opportunity to be educated in the languages. Mm-hmm. It's a privilege to know people who can kind of speak the language of Bible narrative generally, but also know Hebrew enough that we can be in conversation with each other when translating. Mm-hmm. It's a privilege to have the time to devote to sit down and translate these texts as a practice. And while I felt personally a bit scattered in doing it and overwhelmed and stressed, I still am in a place of privilege that I was able to engage it at all. And that kind of makes me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I feel like I wish this was more normalized and that others had the opportunity to engage it without having to afford seminary to do it. Mm-hmm. It makes me sad that it is not part of our normal Christian practice to learn the languages that the Bible was initially written. Last episode when we talked about the Seder and the Passover, we kind of had a little brief conversation about what it means to engage Jewish tradition in a way that's honoring that we are not Jewish, but also honoring that we believe we've been grafted into the family, and what does carrying on those traditions look like. And in a deeply Jewish tradition, you are learning Hebrew as part of your faith journey. And it just makes me sad that we don't do that. I understand why we don't practically, particularly as someone who was very stressed doing that, translating, even with the education I have. And I remember the stress of doing the education, but perhaps it wouldn't have been if it had just been a normalist part of my introduction to the church. I don't know. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, it is interesting to like have translations. I think was a move to try to make, when you think about the first time Bibles were translated into a common language, that was the attempt, right?
Like, to make it more accessible.
To make it more accessible. Let's bring it into the translation so that everyone can read it whenever they want in their heart language, etc.
Yeah, but even that is from so much of translating. What it says almost depends on what the person translating it is bringing into the text.
Yeah.
So
certainly ours do. Like we were able to reflect kind of on the seasonality of Isaiah 58, even though Isaiah 58 had nothing to do with Lent when it was written. so yeah,
there was no Easter yet.
Exactly. So yeah, it is interesting to just be reminded that a translation always carries something with it. Certainly, you can't look at 6 translations and not see the difference in the translators. So it is definitely a gift to be able to go through the act of translation. And yeah, it'd be interesting. There's certainly people who have done the work of making curriculum accessible to churches in like a Sunday school format. Super great curriculum too. Maybe we'll do.
You just need the system to be willing to engage the thing, and then
the time to.
The barriers need to be broken. And I totally understand why the barriers are there, and I think that it would be, especially now, a total system rewrite. That is stressful, but yeah, just kind of sitting in the sadness of what feels a little bit lost, and also thinking about all the barriers though that would be broken by equipping people to translate, in terms of like really being able to for themselves interpret the word from their own experience and their own lens from the original, instead of relying on someone else's interpretive lens in the English or the Spanish or whatever language you're reading it that it's been translated into. I don't know. Yeah,
I was wondering if it's worth it to zoom back a bit and say why. I mean, because I think you said you could read the 6 translations and tell that they were different translators. But let's imagine there's someone out there that hasn't noticed what the difference is, or wouldn't know what they are. I've definitely heard that multiple times. Like, wait a minute, you're learning, or you learned Hebrew and Greek. Like, why?
Right.
Like it is translated.
Right.
And then
fair question.
We give give the explanation about the interpretive lens of the translator, and it's like, well, that's why you just get a literal translation, right? Where it is just translate it literally what it says. Why? How do we respond to that?
Well, I think the tricky thing about longing for a literal translation is that's not how languages work. There are phrases and idioms in each language that when you translate it literally into another one, those words don't make sense together in my language, even though everyone would know what you were talking about if we all spoke the language we're translating from.
What do you mean, Hannah? Give some examples.
I am bad at that.
Give some examples of
an idiom that doesn't translate well.
What?
I could ask you on the spot, but you might blow it.
What?
Blow it.
Okay,
probably
that
wouldn't
was
translate.
not appropriate.
Also, inappropriately.
I thought of a Hebrew one. I have a Hebrew one.
All right.
I have a Hebrew one. Okay.
It was an example, friends.
Wait, I need a pause. What does idiom mean?
An idiom is like a saying that means something else. Like
fair.
To fly off the handle doesn't mean to literally
a
jump
turn of
off
phrase.
of a handle
It's a thing in
fly.
language.
It's
but
like a metaphor that we just accept into regular speech.
Got it.
Like that's fire.
That is fire.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
we're
it's not
reading that in the
literally
Hebrew, and we
fire.
go like, oh, there was fire in the room. Like what?
It's like actually
literal
no.
fire.
But one in the Hebrew that gets translated as slow to anger.
Oh, fair.
What's literally in the Hebrew is long of nose.
Yeah.
Because there's this concept in, this culture that is not English culture, that anger, the way that anger is expressed is through the nose, like the sort of like if you imagine the sound a horse makes when it snorts, like that.
Good job, Maddie.
That's kind of where anger is stored.
Yeah.
So if you're short of nose, you would have a short fuse, we would say. But long of nose means it takes a really long time for the anger to travel through the nose out into the world.
This is also reminding me, I don't know if this is necessarily an idiom, but there's a lot of jokes in the Bible that are not appropriate for all ears that you really do miss in the English translation. But
A lot of puns.
Yeah.
So many puns.
It's the Bible is much more salacious?
Spicy. Snarky.
Salacious?
Salacious
I
is
think.
nice.
It's
Spicy
close to
is
the
what
right
I
word.
mean,
Yeah.
ultimately. It's much spicier. It is spicy in the English as well, but it is very spicy
Such snark.
in the original. And funny.
Biting.
In addition, you go ahead.
Another thing about trying to do a literal translation is word order means something different in different languages.
Sure, yeah.
So like Hebrew sentences often start with an and a verb, and then you go to the subject. But if you do that in English, it's like what?
Well, you had one of those in one of the verses that you did for Isaiah 58, right? Like, but me they seek day after day, and like we wouldn't do that, but they seek me, we do that.
Well, some of us would do that for fun every
Sure.
time.
Would.
I decided to translate it like that on Instagram because I wanted it to be awkward.
Well, how else do you capture it?
Yeah.
And because in English, at least in written word, I might be able to do it in a vocalized translation, right? Like, but you're seeking out me day after day, and you get it. You get that emphasis that comes by putting it first in the language. But in English, word order is pretty locked in. You can't say the dog but the man and the man but the dog, and it means the same thing.
Well, there's a word in the Shema that if you move around, is it the? You know what? You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
No,
I'm not.
just
Just waiting.
Keep following the thread.
There's just some words that we have to insert into the text to make it even make sense.
to
in
put the
English.
English word the
And so
in. Yeah,
when
yeah.
we put the English word the in,
it
can completely change the
So
entire.
we get like, hear, O Israel,
Yeah.
Lord, the Lord, our God, Lord, oneness.
Yeah, and when we insert those, it can change the meaning of the text depending on where we put it.
The Lord is our God, the Lord alone. The Lord our God, the Lord is one.
Yeah,
Are all fair.
but it's an interpretive choice.
Yeah.
Again, depending on the preference of the interpreter or interpreters.
And then we get into that fun. I remember one of my favorite moments in class that I had with Rachel Billings was my Hebrew professor. And I don't remember what text it was we were doing, but I remember I asked a question like, so wait, is this like this or is this like this? And she went like, yeah, so, and then moved on to a different topic. And it was like, wait, because Hebrew, I would say, is more like English poetry in that the clarity of the words isn't there. We can't lock down a particular meaning a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it's true of the Greek as well. I would say Greek is a bit more literal, mathematical than the Hebrew. The Greek is what the New Testament is primarily written in. So Hebrew is the Old Testament. Greek is the New.
Closer to a language that English was based off of.
Yeah, it's a little more literal. But also, if anyone out there who hasn't taken a language class takes one, what blew my mind was my Greek professor showed us like the earliest manuscripts that existed. There's no spaces between the letters.
Yeah.
So even the texts from which we are translating are guesses of what letters made up the words and where did the spaces. I mean, it's just, I had a complete crisis of, it's a lie. But it's not. It's actually, no, isn't this fun? We get to play with the biblical narrative, and that is how it was designed to be. They're stories, and they're lovely, but they don't have to be quite so serious. We can have fun with how we translate.
It also, like, that feels like a particular calling for people who want to do the work of engaging scripture translation. Like, that's work because we all have, manuscripts that don't have spaces, and we need spaces to make sense of it, or vowels in the Hebrew. And part of the way that we can even translate those things now is you have these people who have been faithful to the text to continue telling the story, continue dwelling in the text, engaging the story, passing it on to the next people. And you trust that the Spirit is present enough in the Word to continue to speak what the Spirit needs to speak, even with our human and potential interpretations that potentially misunderstand, or, put spaces where they're not supposed to be, or choose the wrong vowels, or
have a really particular point that they want to get across.
Yeah, that we just misunderstand. So both, what a beautiful community of people we get to participate into, but also what a weighty calling to step into, and not or important, significant. Like it is also weighty and does need to be taken seriously, but also what Maddie just said about playing is so important too, because this text is supposed to be delighted in, and you need that both, and you need to be able to say, this is important, this work is important, and we're going to take it seriously, and God is here. And in order to capture some of those things from the original language, you have to get creative with how you choose turns of phrase in your own language in a way that you hope is consistent with the heart of the text in the biblical language. Like, there's so much artistry that goes into this too, and you need that creativity and play as a component of this work.
Right, and everything is interpretive, and so seeing that as a feature and not a flaw, that we have, like you said, the 6 different translations or whatever, and we all sat in the same space, which we're talking about, and did this together, and kind of like kicked around what we understood, the verb, the tenses, the best word to kind of translate a thing. And I bet, like, if we all had to nail down, I know this, as we nailed down our phrasing of it, it would all be different for sure.
Well, yeah, because we took turns we translated it all together, like a rough translation, the last several weeks, but then whoever's turn it was to do the posting would do like the final finesses on the 2 verses that they were posting about. And I tried to do my own final finesse translations too, and like the things that I chose to do for those verses were different than what y'all posted. And like Jackson, if you go to his post, I think is verse
3 and 4.
Yeah, 3 and 4. Like, he very specifically chose to emphasize you all, which in English, you means you singular and plural.
Yeah.
But in Hebrew, those are very specifically different. So you have to make a choice in English to insert that extra word of you all are doing these things. And Jackson made a very intentional choice to point that out in his translation. And I didn't do that in my translation. And there's just,
And
even
fun.
among the four of us. There's so many
Yeah.
fun choices.
And
Well,
my family pointed out to me, like, this week was yours, right? And I didn't, like, some of you had put your names on yours, and I don't think I did on mine. And it was like I am being recognized in my translation of the text.
Well,
Yeah.
also I think we can recognize each other in our creative choice and how
Or like
it
our artsy
is
style,
posted
whatever.
as well.
That too, that
but
too.
but yes, I also think how playful you're able to be with it depends on the level of permission you feel you've given yourself to be. Because I already said this, but I was very stressed and kept wanting you to give me permission for how I translated it.
Yeah.
Which I think is fine. That's a way to engage it, but
We all know better than to give Maddie permission.
but true. But even that changes how it's interpreted. Am I allowed to translate it this way, or does it have to be this way? Can I insert this there? Like, how creative am I allowed to be? Which is stupid. The answer is yes. But people are really opinionated about that as well. So it's just it's hard to get out of your own head. Particularly, why are you looking at me like that?
Because you're
Phil?
talking.
Oh.
Sorry.
See, I am powerful. But especially if you have been in a situation where people are telling you this is the final meaning and this is how we have to interpret it. Like we only read from the NIV and nothing else. That is that is very restrictive. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's like a complicatingness there, because I agree that there is this like this invitation, this freedom, this like play with it, and also like
There are rules.
there are some rules,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
there are
there's
rules.
and most of them are like, you know, stay consistent with the story of God, but even that rule is like,
What does that mean?
what story of God are you talking about?
Yeah. Whose story of God?
So yeah, it is interesting to then like, yeah, if I've certainly, I mean, I know my story carries NIV watchdog people,
Same.
and yours does too, Maddie. But like, there's other kinds of watchdogs too, and it's just interesting which neighborhood you came up against.
King
Well,
James.
King James version is another one. Yeah,
Which, fun fact, King James version is the only copyright-free version.
it's true.
Unless you
Not the only
translate
one,
it yourself.
Yeah.
But,
Or lots of other languages.
well, sure. Okay, I mean English.
Yeah.
Why do you always gotta humble me? The reason you see King James in a lot of like
Dollar stores?
public things and
Yeah.
dollar stores and stuff is because it's
Or,
copyright free.
Other
Yeah,
Bibles.
we know. We all know. Shout out if you know you know. Anyways, yikes. We gotta end this loop. What was I saying before I was humble?
Coming up
About
against
being able to
different-
play.
Yeah, different watchdogs, NIV.
Oh, the language does have rules. Like each word does have a
Yeah.
translation. You also have to have an understanding of those rules to be able to translate. Like I forgot about this until we started translating, but there's in the Hebrew piel and hitfil
Yeah.
He feel.
and kefil and qual call.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For one word. And some of the words wildly different meanings depending on which it is. Puel is another form.
And then you get there and you're like, why was this only translated this way in this verse?
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
only exists for this verse purpose. And who decided that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have questions.
Yeah.
And then you also are like, wow, there's like so much he feel in this chapter. Like, what does it mean that we're writing from this mood the
Yeah.
whole time? And like,
We're
there's
so
all
dumb.
sorts of fun discoveries that you get to make.
I had so many fun conversations when I was in language class, on top of bemoaning it and
So
crying.
I wanted to just kind of go back to the interpretive thing for a second, because it's a what's the word when you harp on something? Dead horse that I beat? I don't know.
Oh my gosh. Is that the phrase?
That's an idiom.
Yeah, that's an
idiom,
idiom.
It's a little bit much.
But if we translate it, it'd be like, wow, so Phil was someone that liked to hit dead animals. I don't-
Right.
This is what we're talking about. But the idea that even when we, when we're talking about scripture performance, which is a thing we all love, I like reading it out loud. I've been a part of groups where it's like, some people will be really excited about it, like how you dramatized it, right? Like you made it like storytelling. And then other people that are kind of offended by that, and that's scripture needs to be read seriously and in a certain way, and that you shouldn't put your interpretation on it like that.
Yeah.
while reading monotone is an interpretation. You are saying something about the text. Anytime you do anything with it, I mean, I would say even if we think about I'm reading the Bible. If I decide the Bible sits in my bathroom and I read it, then I'm saying something about what I believe about this, even as I'm picking it up and reading it. Mm-hmm. If I'm setting a devotional time of like 2 hours in the morning where I read something, if I treat it as something that I memorize, we are interpreting what the text is anytime we engage with it. And so particularly I think in translations, as we read translations, as we share interpretations as sermons and such, for all of us to understand that part of the gift of that interpretation is the one doing the interpretation and what they bring to it. Not that they are the final authority on it, but that each of us gets to reveal facets of it that would not be there except for the lens that it is being gifted with and we are being gifted with in that moment. And so that's one of the really fun things about it for me is to, especially doing it in a group like this, to hear yours and to hear mine and to think yours is wrong, but mine is right. And or mine is saying something that I'm not hearing in yours that I want to be brought out, but I wouldn't have seen the thing had you not said it about yours, is such a gift.
That plays so interestingly with like image of God, Imago Dei stuff too, that like the image of God in each of us is receiving the scripture. And like we are getting to shed light through our bit of stained glass. Yeah. It's delightful.
And wouldn't it be so lovely if we actually talked about different translations that way instead of, no, but this is the right one.
Right, sure.
Which is often from a posture of like power and
control,
harm, and manipulation, which is a devastating use of the biblical narrative, but it is there, and it is also an interpretive choice.
It's an interpretive choice, and this is Phil's judgment, to make oneself or one's group the only trustworthy arbiter of anything, probably, but of the word, and that.
But it kind of go back to what I was saying about how it's a privilege to interpret the text. It's healing in some cases, particularly when the word has been translated in a way to be weaponized against a part of your personhood, which for me as being a female, particularly a female who felt called to church leadership, it was often weaponized to be so that I was told I couldn't do that. It was very, very healing for me to be empowered with the resources to actually know what it says or what the language is, and that there are alternative interpretations, and what I was told isn't the be all end all, or it doesn't have to be. There's so much power in that, and taking back of power in that, and there was a coming back to God, or like oh, there you are, God. I was looking for you, and I was just so confused about where you went when scripture was warped for me in this way. And it makes me sad that not everyone will experience that method of healing if there's no equipment to do it. Yeah. That doesn't mean healing can't happen. You don't need that form of healing, but it was just a big deal.
It's like a really gift I agree that like if only we could maybe we will at some point. I don't know. Not to say that we wouldn't, but certainly there are people who do. If you ever have a chance to take a biblical language course, maybe harken back to this conversation and at least take our testimony, our review of doing it. And it was such a gift of this season in particular to get to translate it.
Absolutely.
Can I say something? One more thing, because I think Hannah said this earlier. The very importantness. The call to be a translator and how special that is. What did you say?
Significant
important, that is.
Weighty.
If you think about the trust that people need to have in that translator and the power that person wields to foster those healing moments, or to harm, and having people around you that you can trust, that you know have done this, and to be in conversation with, is a way to get to do this without taking a biblical Hebrew course or a biblical Greek course. You can engage with written books about the language from trusted scholars and do research on what lens those translators are interpreting through. So I was very, very doom and gloom. No one will ever get to do this if they don't get to take a class, and that's not what I mean.
Yeah. Finding a group of people to do it with, people who have done it before. And thank you also, vamping on that, for, at least assumedly if you're listening at this point, for trusting us enough to engage our translations and interpretations of this text. We're really grateful for having the chance to have shared it with you and continue to share it with you throughout our kind of future Instagram posts and the continuation of this podcast.
And if you haven't checked it out, Wayfolk Arts on Instagram, at Wayfolk Arts. And we'd actually really love if you wanted to read some of those and let us know what resonated. What were you like, what? Why did you choose to do this? I don't understand.
That'd be super fun.
If you have a different translation that you'd like to share, we really would love to hear all those things. So you could comment beneath the post. You can talk about it with us on the Discord, which I don't remember how to access, but it's always linked.
It's always linked below. You can find it there. And you can also find us on Patreon, patreon.com/wayfolkarts. A number of different tiers of patronship there, but it's a great place to hang out and chat about things. You also get access to extra content over there as well, including the after show, where we're going to kind of continue reflecting about this theme for a little while longer. Maybe we'll see what we talk about over there.
Yeah. Also on the Book of Faces.
On the Book of the Faces.
Facebook.
Yep.
It took me way too long.
That was an idiom, Hannah.
We do also have a
it was a brand.
website, wayfolkarts.com. That is always, we're
There.
we're working on it. It
Under
is there for
construction.
you to explore,
It's on a journey.
just like the Lord to the resurrection.
What?
I'm just trying to end the plane back where we started.
Nice.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you all for tuning into this episode. We're grateful to have spent this time with you, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. Bye.
In peace.
Thank you.